In this video, I want to talk briefly about how to interpret energy diagrams, and then I'm going to talk quite a bit about the driving forces of chemical reactions, getting back to that question of what makes a chemical reaction happen. So many of the chemical reactions that we've been doing in school are spontaneous. We don't have to do anything besides mix two things together, and they're just going to occur under normal environmental conditions. In the lab, at room temperature, we don't have to do anything special. Those kinds of reactions are known as spontaneous reactions, and spontaneous doesn't necessarily mean fast. Spontaneous reactions can be fast, but they also can be quite slow, so they can occur at any speed. They usually do need a little bit of energy to get going. In the case of the reactions that we've been doing in class, it's just the energy from the heat of the room. Or if you think about this example of a very spontaneous reaction, a familiar spontaneous reaction of combustion, well, you do need to use a match or something to light that piece of paper on fire. But once it gets started, it keeps itself going. You don't have to keep on applying energy. So that match is the activation energy, just something to get it started. Why are these reactions spontaneous? Why do they occur at all? Well, it's down to two main forces. Energy, which we know the scientific word for that is enthalpy, and then another E word, entropy, which just means disorderliness, how much something is a mess. Two pictures on this slide also show you some spontaneous reactions. Rusting is a spontaneous reaction. It will occur without any extra help from us. If you have something that's iron and it's in an oxygen environment and there's some moisture, it's going to happen. And then the Diet Coke and Mentos is, again, very spontaneous. I think if you've ever seen that or done that, you know it can make quite a mess. And so we're going to be talking about energy and entropy and how they play into making a reaction spontaneous. The main point is if you have decreasing energy when it comes to reactants and products and increasing entropy or increasing disorder, those become the driving forces for all chemical reactions. If both are present, you for sure will have a chemical reaction. If one is present, you might have a reaction depending upon the environment. And if you don't have decreasing energy or increasing entropy, you will not have a reaction no matter how hard you try. So energy diagrams, I just want to go over this so you'll be familiar with them, but they're a way of putting in a picture what is happening to the energy over the course of a reaction. And so we see in this graph you have a starting level of energy here. Your reactant is starting at a certain level. There is a little bit of activation energy which takes it up to get everything going, but then on the way to the products it is all downhill. So very quickly things get over this activation hump and head downhill. The end product is that your energy needs of the product are much lower than the energy needs of the starting material, and so you have some extra energy. You've got this amount of extra energy here in the middle that can be given off to the environment, and typically we see that as a temperature increase. Perhaps it's the solution that the reaction is happening in. You see the temperature go up, things feel hot because we have some excess energy. The needs of the products, so far as energy is concerned, are lower than the needs of the reactants, and so the reaction gives away some energy. So that, of course, is your standard format for an exothermic reaction. In an endothermic reaction, the graph goes the other way in that your reactants start off at a much lower energy level. You have your activation energy again to get things started, and then on the way to the products, you're going to end up with a higher energy level in the products, so you have to have some energy go into the system so that it can be put into the products. And so the endothermic reaction has products ending up at a higher energy level than the reactants. So as I said earlier, reactions are more likely to occur when the products are in a lower energy state. and I just have this simple example using someone's feet, that you know it takes a whole lot more energy to stand on tiptoe than it is to be flat-footed. And so, of course, it would be more comfortable to not be on tiptoe, to be in this lower energy state. And similarly, molecules and atoms are more comfortable when they're in the lowest possible energy state, and that's the one that they're going to head to, if at all possible. Exothermic reactions, remember, have a negative delta H, the symbol we use for enthalpy, because they can give up some energy into the environment because they don't need it. That negative sign is telling us that it's being removed from the chemicals. Now, entropy, as I said, it means disorderliness, and reactions are more likely to occur if the products are more disordered, or you could think of them as being more random than the reactants. There's basically 3 situations where you end up with a more disordered or random product, where there's an increase in entropy. The first one is that the products have a higher kinetic energy, so they have more movement happening in the individual atoms. So that's where you've got a higher temperature, and the higher temperature is causing a phase change from solid to liquid to gas, or moving along that continuum. You can see from this little picture over here on the right, our solid they're looking very orderly in there, not very disordered at all. But then in a liquid state, things are a little more random. Molecules can move a little bit more. They have more messiness going on. They're more disordered. The second way where we're having more entropy is when a molecule breaks apart into parts, like when a solid dissolves into ions. So solid sodium chloride, for example, when you mix it with water to make salt water, you're actually splitting the molecule into the positive sodium ion and the negative chloride ion. So that dissolving process actually is an increase in entropy, because those individual ions then are spinning around in the liquid instead of being right next to each other in the solid. And then the third way that you can see an increase in entropy is if the products have more molecules present than the reactants. If you have 2 things going into a reaction and 3 things coming out, you are creating a situation where there is more entropy. Here are some more examples of changes in entropy. An increase in entropy will lead to more disorder, and we actually would write that chemically. If we're writing a formula, it's called a change in S. S is used for entropy, like we use H for enthalpy. And so a delta being a change in, it would be a positive change in entropy, a delta S that was positive, more disorder when something like ice melts. So any solid going to a liquid form is becoming more disordered. It is an increase in entropy. And then, as I said on the previous slide, if you dissolve a solid to make a solution, then you also are increasing the disorder, you are increasing the entropy. Going the opposite way, decreasing the entropy, it would be a negative delta S if we were putting it in a formula. And so taking something that is liquid and turning it into solid, such as when you freeze water into ice, would be putting more order into those molecules. They're not just floating all over like, randomly in liquid, but they're actually organized into a solid where all they can do is vibrate. Or if you have 2 solutions and you mix them together and make a solid precipitate, like we did in lab with that bright yellow lead nitrate, then that's another example of a decrease in entropy, because the ions that were floating in solution bound together in a molecule, and it was a solid molecule that then fell out of solution. Scientists can actually make some prediction whether reactions will occur if they know the relationship between the energy changes, the entropy changes, and what temperature the reaction will be occurring in. By sort of looking at those 3 variables and understanding how this works, then someone is able to predict if a reaction will occur. Mathematically, this gets put together in something called the Gibbs free energy equation, which we're not going to work with right now, but the G would stand for the Gibbs free energy. And of course, a change in the free energy is what we're trying to calculate by looking at the change in enthalpy, or the change in heat. Subtracting from that, you have the temperature of the environment, of course in Kelvin, and then your change in entropy. If your end result is that the delta G number is negative, then the reaction is spontaneous. Your reactants will become products. I was doing so well. So how do we know a reaction is going to be spontaneous? Well, if the reaction is exothermic and leads to more disorder, then it will be spontaneous at all temperatures. Why is that? Well, that's because both of those driving forces are going in the way they want to go. Exothermic means a lower energy of the products. So you have extra energy left over. More disorder, more randomness also leads things to happen. And so when you have both something going to be exothermic and more disorder, it will be spontaneous. What if a reaction is exothermic, but it leads to more order? So it has a lower energy need of the product, but the products are more organized. What's going to happen then? Well, this is a situation that may be spontaneous. It will be spontaneous if the temperature is low enough so that any excess energy that leaves the reaction can easily move into the environment. That'll continue to allow the reaction to occur because it can kind of throw off that energy, and that'll become more important than the fact that it's leading to more order. So when water freezes into ice, it is requiring a more organization to happen in the water molecules because the solid ice particles will be more organized than the liquid water. So that's more order. But in order to freeze, the water, the liquid water, has to get rid of the heat. So it's going to be an exothermic reaction. It has to give off that heat. And so that will allow at low temperatures the reaction to occur because the environment then can grab that heat energy and it doesn't become something that gets in the way of the reaction moving forward. In fact, interestingly, the fact of water freezing is a warming situation for anything that the freezing is happening on top of. And agriculturalists, farmers sometimes use this in late spring when there's a late freeze. They spray water on plants such as strawberries or orange trees, things that will actually allow a thin layer of ice to form over the fruit because that protects the fruit because as that ice layer forms, it's giving off heat in the freezing process, and then the layer of ice becomes insulation against the colder temperatures of the air. Another situation that may be spontaneous is if you are going to end up with more disorder, so that's good, but the reaction is endothermic, and so it's going to need to be able to take energy from the environment. This type of a reaction will be spontaneous at higher temperatures so that the environment has a lot of energy to provide. An example of that is when ice melts. The ice cube is solid, going into water is going to provide more disorder so that there'll be more entropy in the product, but you have to put energy in, you have to put heat energy into that ice cube in order to get it to melt because it is an endothermic reaction. It needs energy to have it happen. So it has to be in a warm room. We're not going to get the ice cube melting in the freezer. It has to be melting out at higher temperatures. The instant cold packs are another situation where the chemical reaction occurring inside is one that leads to more disorder, generally more molecules in products, or perhaps molecules are being broken apart into ions. The reaction itself is endothermic. It's going to be pulling heat energy from whatever thing it's touching, like your injury that you have that you're trying to make feel better by cooling it down. That will be providing the energy for the endothermic part. And so at warm temperatures, these reactions can happen as well. And then there are those reactions that won't be spontaneous. Even if you add activation energy, they're not going to occur because they are both endothermic, needing energy from the environment to help provide the energy for the products, and they create more order. So we've got two things going in the wrong direction. They will not occur spontaneously. They will not just happen. It would be like having a ball roll uphill. You're not going to get chased uphill by a rolling ball. It will not occur because both things are working in the wrong direction. However, for reactions that are not spontaneous, you can sometimes make them occur by adding energy. And the example that I have here of the rechargeable batteries is a good example of that. The spontaneous reaction is the reaction that makes the electricity, the chemical reaction that's happening inside that battery that lets you power something with it. It's not going to grab the stuff it needs out of the environment to put the electrical charge back into the battery unless you add the energy by plugging it into the recharger. Then you can make that reaction happen. So hopefully this helps you get a better idea about why reactions happen, and that you'll look at reactions from a little more critical eye and say, okay, is it exothermic? Is there extra energy really available in the reaction, so that'll make it easier to happen? Or is it leading to more disorder, and so that also makes it more easy to happen? Or is it some combination of one and not the other, but temperature of the environment is what's so important? Just to be a little more critical thinking using your chemistry skills in everyday life.